Hey guys, been a minute since I last uploaded a video. The video I made on the diff drop was lengthy and detailed, but I wanted to give you guys an idea of how the process has changed and improved for the kits you'll be ordering. And really this applies to basically all the kits since I started producing them. The way I made mine was homemade, as the video implied, and I made a couple changes through the course of this production run, but for the most part this process applies to everything that's been bought. This is how I receive the main components. This one is bent by Send Cut Send, so they do offer a bending service. This part, the bend requirements I have are too tight for their specifications, so I do this one myself on my press right there. And then these are the two spacers I received. There's a slightly different one for the N190. I do a little bit of prep on this with a sander, a little bit of a chamfer, clean them up a bit. I can show you a picture of what they look like unprepped. Sometimes I'll file the inside of here if there's a little bit of slag in the way. But pretty simple. These are straightforward. So what's going on here? In order to have Send Cut Send bend this for me, which saves me some time, I have to have extra material here. And this is a pretty neat thing. They actually have a suggestion on their site to do something like this so that once they've completed their bend, I can just lob this off because it's extra material you guys don't need on your vehicle. It might interfere with some of the welds too. And it's not part of the design, right? I don't want it there. It doesn't need to be there. It just needs to be there to support the bend. So it's a little bit of waste. So what this looks like after the cutting is that. And just rough cut with the cutoff wheel. And then I'll buzz it with the flappy disc. And I'll go around the whole perimeter, just smooth it out a little bit. And one thing I learned on my first run of making these is a CNC plasma cut part hardens this material. It's extremely local, extremely thin, probably microns, but it's hardened. And if I were to, I don't know how they do it. They don't seem to have a problem, but if I bend that on my press, it will crack. Guaranteed. I ruined like 3 parts right off the bat. So what I do is everywhere I'm going to have a bend, which will be the front end, and then each of these flanges, is take the flappy disc. Sorry about the focus, guys. I take the flappy disc and I chamfer it a little bit, which helps, and then I clean the surface a little bit. And that's all it takes. Then I get a really clean bend, no cracks to propagate. So that's the step one. And of course I'll do the whole perimeter just to take the edge off and clean the surfaces a little bit. Here is a improved gauge for bending. So if you were to throw this up under the press, you're going to have to locate that press correctly. Some of you might have holes in yours. That's how I did it for mine, and you're fine. It's not structurally compromised. The first guides I made localized on those holes, and those holes I thought were necessary to help make it bend easier, and then also to be a place where I put the 3D printed guide. I realized later on I don't need those holes. I can bend this just fine as a solid part, and these also locate actually quite a bit tighter than the pegs that go in the holes. So you can see there's a little bit of a lip there. It grabs this corner, and this back does two things. You can see there's a little bit, not focusing well, there's a little bit of a standoff, so I can insert the part for the gauge like so. It's located tight to the corner here, tight to the back edge here, and this little standoff here. So that's exactly where the bend needs to be according to CAD. Now I don't need this little dip here. I just added that. Some of you may not have it. Don't worry, it's fine. I just figured later on as I was ordering more of these, maybe it would help this bend be a little bit cleaner, get this corner away from the bend radius. Here's what it looks like after the first bend. So you can see these are throwaway, which is fine. It cost me nothing to make these. It just guides the press when I clamp down, then it just gets smushed. Here's a 3D printed gauge I made. This is just a quick check for the 90 degrees. Of course, you could buy a square, but what I wanted was something that would, clear the corner. And you can see that this is actually just shy of 90, which is fine. I prefer it to be a little bit wider because when I weld it, you'll see I clamp it a little bit. So yeah, we'll go ahead and, since I'm making 3 today, I'll finish the same bend that I have here for these 2, and then I'll go ahead and do the next bend. It just helps me with the setup to do the same bend multiple times. So the reason I don't get this part bent by send cut send is that by the time you bend one flange, you don't have room for the other. At least according to their specifications, that would be for the press brake clearance. And frankly, that would be a limitation for me as well. And when I bent this part on this press brake, the first bend would make contact here and it would open it up, and then I'd have to squeeze it back down. So I took a cutoff wheel and cut out a nice scallop on the back here so I have plenty of clearance. And also, to get the load center of the press right over the bend, so that it doesn't run crooked or wonky, I just placed this big old chunk of steel as a bridge and another piece of steel here to support it. Those of you familiar with the design will know that there's actually a little bend here to help wrap up the front of the bracket. And this hole here serves the same purpose as this one, though this one is for me to bend rather than send cut send. I've got this gauge to fit right over the top, locate the press brake where I need, and then make a bend. Now that this one's bent, I'll go ahead and take the cutoff wheel and then polish it up. And the reason it's at an angle is because if I put that straight through, even though the bend is intended to be here, this would be such a weak point that it would just fold it over. So placing this at an angle strengthens it quite a bit. Also, it looks kind of cool when it's done. You'll see. Now, how do I determine how far down to bend? I got a little 3D printed gauge. Through some trial and error, I figured out what size I need. So once I run that press brake down to just touching that brake, I've got a perfect bend. Alright, here it is all cleaned up after the bend. That'll be welded, of course. So before I weld, I like to do a little descaling. Totally unnecessary for welding steel, but I like to do it. You may remember from my other video, I like to 3D print a gauge to help me line everything up. I anticipated having to make these every once in a while. This is the first one I ever made, and it still works just fine. So what I do is I slide that on here. It's a little bit trickier to do with one hand, so forgive me. So slides on tight there, and then you line up the hole. And you can really just do that by feel, right? Until you feel no edge, like so. Then what I do is I clamp, well, I'll put the clamp right there to hold that in place. And then we slide this on. Now, you can see there, that tells me we're pretty good, lined up. I'll go ahead and spot weld it with this in place, then I remove it. Now I've experimented with a few different setups with clamps. When I first started doing these, I would have small clamps to kind of hold things in place, and then the big clamps, including one kind of clamping this down, this part down to this part. I've found that that's all really unnecessary as long as I get it set up right. The key is to clamp your gauge. This is for those who are getting the U-weld kit. Clamp your gauge down to the main body, right around this edge here, and then take your other clamp, and I like to pinch down on the flanges here because you may notice they're maybe a little wider than is perfectly square, which is fine. Gives you something to clamp down on. You get a little parallel to the gauge, and make sure that the clamp itself is not resting down here. You want to make sure that the parts have a good engagement all the way around both sides. See, no contact there with the clamp. And having this one weighted like this and this one weighted like that, everything sits nicely. And then you just put a couple pieces here. I've got these spacers. You could throw any scrap under there to clear this front lip. Now the key, obviously you want to line up with your gauge holes, but the priority is welding this bracket to this when everything's nice and square. You can come and wrap this later, however is necessary. So the alignment of this is not critical. This stuff's what's critical. All right, now the part's fully welded and ready to ship. Just kidding. As you can see, we got 4 tacks. That's more than enough to hold it on. I'll see if I can fit this in here. The gauge slides, right in. So I try to take things down rather quickly so that I don't overheat things. If you've got a U-weld kit, you only need this one time anyway. So you slide it out, and now you're ready to go. Usually what I do is I just lay it on its side, do one side, flip it over, do the other, and then I'll flip it front ways, do the interior here. And then sometimes, you could just go right on down. I like to prop this up a little bit, just easier for me to get my positioning, run these. And once the flanges have been fully wrapped, come around the front. Again, pick this up a little bit, make sure I've got to wrap all the way around here. And then I'll wrap this guy a little bit this side, and then we'll flip it and close that gap up. All right, we've got the flanges fully welded. Just a note, when you come around to the front side, you don't want to do too much weld because you need to leave plenty of space for the head of the fasteners here. And some of these fit pretty tight. I normally don't clamp it. This one had a little bit of a gap. There's always some variability with how I place this bend and how much I bend it. This one had a bit of a gap, so I prefer to clamp it down before I weld. All right, there you have it. Fully welded all the way around. Haven't brushed it yet. Normally what I'll do is I'll brush it clean, and if there's any obvious or more glaring speckles, I'll tap them off with a screwdriver. I like it to be a little bit clean, especially if I'm going to paint it. I wrap what I can on the front side. Obviously, you're not going to close this whole gap, but that's plenty. Also, one other thing I like to do, any of you welders in the comments, let me know if this is a total waste of time, but after every pass, sometimes there's nothing left here, but once in a while I'll get a lot of extra filament, or I should call it wire. I like to cut it off before making my next pass. My thinking is that when I pull the trigger, wire's feeding and gas is feeding, and I want to always make sure that the gas gets there first. That's my thinking. I don't know if it's a waste of time and a waste of wire, but that's what I do. All right, so what does a kit look like that's got 15,000 miles on it and a couple wheeling trips? Shout out to Lobo, by the way. I'm pretty happy with the skid. I like things a little scratched up. You can see that this took a hit and didn't mind too much. In fact, I may have actually ruined my winch line. We'll see about that. This is it. The first one I ever made. This was actually cut out on a mill. You can see I got the holes here. A few of you guys may have it, and I mean a few, like less than 10. All the rest look like the other ones you've seen in the video. Unnecessary. Maybe you think it looks cool, maybe you think it looks worse. Totally fine. You can see we've dragged that over some rocks, and it did exactly what it's supposed to, a low angle. Seems that things are able to slide without much hang up. And the diff itself is fine. I know some of you guys have the skids underneath it. That's cool too. I really haven't had much issue with that. I do intend to someday get around to making a bash guard for that. I just have had no time, and frankly I haven't busted it yet. If I busted my diff, I'd probably reprioritize, but it's really been fine for me. So yeah, if you've got some miles on a kit, I'd be curious to see some pictures. You got it scratched up. How's it holding up? Let's see it.